Today, indeed, we will go more in depth on the financial mechanisms that were set up with the help of the European Commission support, but also the public-private partnership into specific geographies in Portugal and Poland. And we would like to emphasize also the role of EU funding in setting up this successful social investment impact initiative at the national level. And we will do so with 4 amazing speakers that I will briefly introduce now. Just let me share the screen. Perfect. So as I said, the discussion of today, it will be about the private-public collaboration and best practices that we can share for institutionalizing these learnings. And the discussion of today summarizes very well the role that EVPA has within the impact investment ecosystem. Because as a thought leader, EVPA monitors and communicates noteworthy developments in the sector at the European and national level, and voices the concerns and expectation of its networks to policymakers. And we strongly believe that by sharing these success stories, we could better contribute to the cross-border transfer of knowledge, aiming at replicating and scale up these financial mechanisms, which could bring real value to final beneficiaries. In its second role as a catalyst, EVPA actively connects relevant stakeholders and facilitates conversation and collaboration between them on key policy topics. And this is what we will also do for the next 15 minutes, because keeping in mind these 2 main roles, EVPA documented since 2016 many best practices within the EU ecosystem. And we consider that these are very inspiring also for the audience, because these 2 case studies will be presented today by our speaker, Vera Igreja Baracho, from Portugal Social Innovation. She will introduce us to the success stories, as she's a specialist in an advisory role in the Social Innovation Mission Unit at Portugal Social Innovation. And with Magdalena Ciucrita and Michał Radziwiłł, that will introduce us to the Social and Economic Investment Company, TISE, in Poland. Moving also towards the core of the content of today, this session will also introduce us to the European Commission's endeavors in facilitating access to finance to relevant social stakeholders. And on this topic, the floor will be given to Dana Verbal, Policy Officer for Social Entrepreneurship at the Directorate General Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion at the European Commission. Dana is notably working on measures to facilitate access to finance and to build capacity of social economy stakeholders. Keeping short, and this being said, I would like to give the floor to Dana Verbal to start the sharing of this knowledge. Dana, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Catalina, and it's very nice to be here and to see quite a few familiar faces, and some faces I don't know. So indeed, as you said, I would just a little second to set my screen. So I am here to tell you about the EU funding for enabling access to finance for social enterprises, and in particular to tell you about what type of funding was made available in the past years, and what was the impact of this funding so far, and also some lessons we've learned that could be interesting for the attendees today. So it's maybe important to mention that we only started with measures at EU level to enable access to finance for social enterprises following the communication on a social business initiative that was launched in 2011. So there wasn't really anything there specifically on this topic before this communication. And this communication identified access to finance as a particular challenge. There was an analysis that showed there is a market gap for social enterprises in accessing finance. And then these measures were continued until today. So the market has developed quite a lot in the meantime since then. We had another initiative in the meantime, the Startup and Scale Up initiative, which also said that access to finance is still a relevant challenge. And maybe interesting for your discussion today, that initiative in 2016 also identified the international agenda as a topic where social economy should be promoted further in the international space. And now we are at the moment of preparing the action plan for the social economy, which will be launched towards the end of this year. And I can tell you that access to finance, it's again going to be a part of this initiative. And also maybe even more than before, the international dimension will be looked at, and how the EU can promote social economy also outside the EU borders. And going to the next slide, here you can see how a study that we undertook on the impact of all these initiatives is structured. So basically now we are at the moment of a new initiative, and we thought it would be a good idea to look at the impact of previous measures that we've launched. So recently this year, we published a study evaluating the impact of all the initiatives. You can see on the screen the 5 impact dimensions that were looked at. In case you are interested in them, you can read the study. I would talk today more about this impact dimension C, which is about access to finance. But before I tell you about the impact of our measures for enabling access to finance, I thought on the next slide I would explain a bit what were these measures. I'm sure some of you are already very familiar with them and implementing them, but still it's good to do a recap of these measures. So what was launched at EU level were financial instruments. The first one was launched in 2015. I'm not sure if you can call it a financial instrument, but in any case of a financial product, it's a guarantee for loans. And this guarantee has enabled financial intermediaries to take more risks and therefore to give loans to social enterprises. And we also launched a capacity building instrument, which means equity investments in financial intermediaries with the aim of building their capacity to deal with social enterprises. More recently, there was a so-called funded instrument, which means giving liquidity to financial intermediaries, especially those that are not banks, so that they can take this liquidity and transfer it further in the form of loans to social enterprises. And then we also piloted some equity investments in social enterprises, both at early stages and in scaling up impact-driven enterprises. But all these financial instruments had to be accompanied by some sort of advisory measures and grants to build the market, because actually in 2016, when we started rolling out the first instrument, some countries were really not that developed, so there wasn't really an appetite for our instruments in the country. So we needed to do some work to build the market. I think there is still a lot to do in some countries to first build the market before it becomes ready to implement financial instruments. So one of the grants that we're giving, for example, is to networks that are active at EU level, like EVPA. This was the first network that we started giving a grant to in this area, because they help us intermediate between the EU level and organizations like investors that are closer to the ground and really able to implement these instruments. And interestingly, if you go back to the slide, I'd like to still mention this grant for developing the demand and supply side of finance markets. This was the first call was actually launched in 2013. So even before we started with the financial instruments, explicitly in order to build this market and enable more intermediaries to set up financial instruments. The grant was given to intermediaries to do, for example, mapping and activities to gather commitment from investors and legal work that they needed to do in order to set up instruments. So this is a way of doing when your market is not yet developed enough to receive financial instruments. Going then to the next slide, this is really about the results of the evaluation study that I mentioned on the impact of these activities. What the study found was that, for example, since we started implementing these financial instruments and grants and advisory services, the conditions in financial intermediaries improved largely. The intermediaries are now more specialized, they are more professional. They are also more specialized in terms of the types of instruments that they offer and the groups that they target. But the interviewees mentioned that there is still a lot to be done in this area. In terms of managerial skills in social enterprises, this has also improved thanks to a few of the actions we launched. The EU level networks also contributed very much to this. But again, the opinion is that what was done is really not enough. If you take the whole size of the EU and the small size of our interventions, the reach remained limited. And an area where a lot was done, if you can still go to the previous slide, is about in mobilizing private financing. So here the easy guarantee is the one who was most effective because a big number of contracts were signed. So for every euro of public financing, we mobilized a lot more euros of private financing. And another area where the EU funding acted as a game changer was in the area of grants. Well, here on the slide, it's presented as EU funding at national and regional level. This is funding that came in particular from the European Social Fund and also from the European Regional Development Fund. This funding is usually dispersed through grants. There are only, I think, 2 countries that are pioneering also financial instruments, and these countries are here today, Portugal and Poland, but most of the other countries deal with grants. And on my last slide, you can see some interesting lessons we've learned from how countries used these grants for supporting social enterprises. So we learned, for example, that grants had a wonderful effect in countries, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, where there was nothing there to begin with. So it's very easy to achieve a major impact when you start from 0 or close to 0. But the funding also helped to raise the visibility of social enterprises, even in countries where they are was no formal recognition of social enterprises, because they had to work with operational definitions, and this attracted interest and gave more visibility to what a social enterprise is, and it also maybe determined the adoption of a legal form later. And in some countries, there was a focus almost exclusively on work integration. And we think this is because this is where the biggest challenge is in those countries, but also because there isn't such a good understanding from public authorities about the fact that social enterprises can be active also in other areas, and they can be innovative as well. And we also found that in some countries, the support was limited to starting up new social enterprises, including in the country I come from, in Romania. And this didn't have a very positive effect on the long term. On the short term, it determined many enterprises to be set up and to register as a social enterprise. But they didn't really benefit from incubation support, and the incubators or organizations that were there to help them didn't benefit from any support either. So once the grant was finished, these enterprises either ceased to exist or they ceased to be social. What we advise very much for the future is to have either a policy framework in place, or if a policy framework looking at the whole ecosystem is missing, at least at the level of the funding policy makers, the ones who take the decisions how to spend the money, we advise them to really have a look at the whole ecosystem and do more than just grants for starting up, but also do grants along the life cycle, so grants for developing activities that are already there, looking at whether there are sufficient networks that could support social enterprises, whether the intermediaries are ready to give financing, so supporting as well the intermediaries and the incubators and support organizations. So I will end with this nice note about the ecosystem, and I think you will hear later also some success stories about ESF.
Thank you very much, Dana, for this insightful overview. And I would like to encourage all the audience to write any curiosities or questions in the Q&A box, or if you want to share some best practices with us from your region, please feel free to use the chat box. And now I would give the floor to Vera to introduce us to the Portugal Social Innovation success story.
Thank you, everyone. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope to be quick to share so much of what we have done in the last years. So Portugal Social Innovation is a government initiative created in 2014, aimed at promoting social innovation and stimulating the social investment market in Portugal. We have a dedicated unit within the government of no more than 15 people, and to which I belong. As already mentioned, this initiative is the first of its kind in Europe, given that Portugal is or was the only member state to set aside EU funds until 2020 to use new financing instruments to foster innovation and social investment. At the time, and within the partnership agreement between Portugal and the European Commission, we had decided to mobilize around 150 million euros from the European Social Fund and to channel these funds to the market through 4 financing instruments dedicated to fund projects that offer alternative and innovative solutions to solve social problems. Moving to the next slide, Portugal Social Innovation, we believe that we have been both a catalyst and a market builder in the sector through funding, but also facilitating the social investment impact ecosystem. Our goal was and still is to generate these new solutions for important social problems, which should complement the traditional solutions and stimulate the social investment market that was still appearing back at the time, and because by growing this market, we believe that we will have instruments better suited to the specific needs of the social economy actors and the social entrepreneurs. So in a way, we aim to empower these players by improving their response levels, but also contributing to their economic and financial sustainability. Moving on, and again, I just want to highlight a dimension, because when we launched the program, we realized that our financial instruments and this specific program was aimed and should have a financial focus or a funding focus, and that was to exclusively finance what we named social innovation and social entrepreneurship initiatives. We even used an acronym which means CSAE, and that nomination is based on a qualification framework created by our initiative that considers that a CSAE is a project aimed at implementing or developing a solution for one or more social problems, which in other words means that we fund projects that aim to step in one or several social problems in an effective way to generate positive social impact. Also, these CSAE, the social innovation and social entrepreneurship initiatives, should always seek to solve or alleviate the social problem by encouraging a change in the living conditions or lifestyles or life opportunities of a potential target group. And as you can see in the image, we always say that the idea is that these new solutions, they complement the conventional ones. They should complement the conventional ones. They should have this effective social problem solving approach and also an effective way of using resources. In the next slide, we can see a scheme, and Catalina, yes, please, you can pass all of them. And this scheme shows that these projects that we select for funding, they should have at least 3 requirements. And very shortly, and repeating a bit what was mentioned, is we always should start with an existing social problem. And this means if there is an identifiable target group or a specific vulnerability, all projects should be able to identify that. Then we should always look to the solution. If this project offers a solution that is different from the traditional ones, and basically, and in particular, if those projects promote a different approach from those promoted or procured by the government, and that if they are driven by even an innovative product, service, or methodologies. And thirdly, if these projects that come to us, if they drive social impact, which means if the project has this focus or this power of transformation in the quality of life of the people or the target group they are looking at, and if it contributes to the levels of improvement of well-being today, but also in the future. And if you see actually where Portugal social innovation enters, it's really in the intersection of these 3 elements, and it's where we come up with the instruments to fund this innovation. Having said this, and we can look quickly to the next slide, to the instruments that we created. We actually, and as mentioned by Dana, we have created 4 financing instruments focused on the specific stages of the life cycle of a social innovation project. In all of them, in all of these instruments, in addition to the funding, the public funding we provide, there is always the participation of one or several social investors, which can be public or private entities that accompany the co-finance of the project selected by our program. This financing, it's approved based on the submission of an application, of applications to a call for proposals, which are open on a regular basis. And if I recall well, the first calls for proposals under Portugal Social Innovation opened back in 2016, although we were set up in 2014. Moving to the next slide, and in brief, I know it's too much information, but I just wanted to highlight that of the 4 financial instruments that you can see on the screen managed by us, 3 are grant-based and are created for social sector organizations and social entrepreneurs, including 1 outcomes-based model of social impact bonds. And 1 instrument, it's a financial instrument. And indeed, I believe it's the first public impact investment fund, well, the first of its kind created with European funds, aimed at stimulating precisely the social impact market to enable credit institutions and equity investors to directly participate in social innovation and social entrepreneurship projects, while at the same time it gives access to finance for SMEs in the field. I will go just, I just want to highlight this, still on the previous slide, these 4 instruments. I just wanted to highlight some specifications on each one of them. It's that the first instrument, the capacity building for social investment, addresses specific training needs of the social sector organizations. And this was done by providing tickets of up to 50,000 euros, precisely to fund training consultancy services, mentoring or certified training initiatives. And this also relates to what Dana was mentioning, that we needed at the time to create the ecosystem. So that's why this instrument, I believe we actually only launched 2 calls for it, but it was the instrument, the first required instrument in the country to create and to reinforce this ecosystem. The second instrument is the Partnerships for Impact, finances the creation, implementation, or expansion of social innovation projects through co-financing with social investors. Thus, we believe it encourages impact philanthropy and contribute to a more stable and efficient and sustainable financing model, because we fund above projects above 50K through a non-repayable grant up to 70% of the financing needs. And the remaining 30% must be insured by 1 or more private or public social investors. The third instrument, the social impact bonds, finances innovative projects in public policy priority areas against an outcome-based contract. And these projects must be committed to achieve measurable social outcomes and efficiency gains. And we had selected 6 main areas, which I'll mention a bit later. And the interesting aspect is that the applications for this third instrument, they must be submitted in a 3-party partnership, if I may say like this. And it's a partnership between the implementing organizations, those who are running the projects, the social investors who are financing the projects, and the public authorities who are aligned with the policy or the social problem at stake, and that they vouch for the relevance of the expected outcomes. Last but not least, the Social Innovation Fund, in addition to what I've said of being an innovative experiment under the European Social Fund, facilitates the access to credit and co-investment, but especially to support the consolidation or expansion stage of organizations, or when organizations are seeking for significant investments, and when they already have some financial sustainability and capacity to repay investments. So in brief, these are the 4 instruments. Moving on, and I brought here 4, let's say, strategic aspects that emerge from these instruments, and that it's just to share with you, some of them, they emerged, other they were naturally improved. And the first aspect I would like to highlight, it's within the social impact bonds instrument, we came to create a tax incentive for those who are investing in social impact bonds as a way to encourage Portuguese companies and also to encourage them to invest in innovative and experimental projects. Another aspect in the next slide is that within the Social Innovation Fund, we decided to have these two modalities approach. Actually, just to share, initially when this was thought, we actually thought it would be a fund of funds, but then it evolved the idea, and we have an approach as a wholesaler when we provide guarantees and counter guarantees among other favorable conditions to credit institutions, allowing them to fund this type of projects, and then the equity always alongside with private equity co-investment, where these investments can go up for a period of 10 years with a co-investment ratio up to 70% from our side and 30% from private investors, with a call option granted to the co-investors during the first 6 years. One side note is that the tickets for this type of investments and also credits can never go above 2.5 million euros per project. Moving on, and because I know my time is almost done, and then another strategic dimension that I would like to highlight is an unexpected dynamic that emerged from one of the financial instruments, actually the second financial instrument, which is the Partnerships for Impact. And this was the setup or the emergence, the creation of social innovation incubators. We have now we have around 25 funded by Portugal Social Innovation with this specific mission and focus in supporting social entrepreneurship, although some of these 25 are also social incubators. What does it mean? It means that they also work, some of them, and I believe it's 20% of these incubators, they work directly with groups of beneficiaries to promote self-employment and entrepreneurship, either in more rural areas or then with minorities or other excluded groups. Another, and I think this is quite interesting dimension, is that we also came to realize that we needed to create an open portal that we name One Value that gathers and aggregates information on public investment to address different priority social problems. And the goal of this single platform was to aggregate data about public spending and that is allocated within these social issues. One of the things I wanted to highlight here is that this tool or this portal proved to be rather useful for assessing the relevance of the outcomes metrics that we are commissioning through the social impact bonds and in our outcomes-based funding mechanism. So meaning by having this data available, we can validate the unit cost and the efficiency of the projects that are coming to us and being funded through this outcomes payment model. Moving on and just really concluding, and I invite you then to visit the portal I just mentioned, the One Value, because it has even a calculator. I wanted to share just some of the key main challenges that it came across this experience, and to highlight, it was the heavy bureaucracy of European funds, and this outmatches the size and experience of small entrepreneurial organizations. In particular, ESF funding is still mainly based on reimbursement of expenses. We are working on the simplification, and then also the lack of data to measure outcomes. That's why we created that portal, and the limited practice of payment for results within public administration. And honestly, a point, it's corporate investors are still hard to mobilize. To conclude on a positive note, there were success factors. We had a strong political support because we are a unit at the center of the government. So the existence of such a central mission unit for implementing social innovation public policy was a strength. this alignment of the financial instruments with the life cycle of projects, and I will just highlight the activation team in the field. This is something quite new for funding structures within EU funds, and we had these people on the ground to mobilize the projects. I will conclude here. Thank you so much. Sorry it was too much information, but I will be available for questions, and it has been a pleasure to share this experience that gathers more than 400 entrepreneurs by now in Portugal and abroad. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vera. It was indeed a comprehensive but very useful presentation. And now let's leave the floor for Magda and Michał to present these case studies.
Hello, everybody. We are very happy to be here. Just one sentence about ourselves, maybe. So I am Michał Radziwiłł. I was the CEO of TISE for 19 years until 2019. Now I am running the Social Venture Capital Fund, which we will present further. And Magda?
Hello, good morning. I'm very happy to be here as well. I'm working as a manager of social economy department within TISE.
And about TISE now, TISE is a fully owned subsidiary of the French bank Crédit Coopératif. As you see on the slide, it was established in 1991. So we have now our 30 years jubilee in place. And we were a venture capital fund, and we were there before any notion of social economy appeared in Poland. Next slide, please. And so TISE developed in various ways. We are a member of EVPA. Since 2008, this is the major fact, we started granting loans to social economy, first of all from our own funds, and then from different projects which Magda will present, funded or co-funded by the government and EU money. Next slide, please. So Magda will present now maybe very briefly the social economy sector and then the instruments of TISE.
Yes, if we want to talk about social economy, the first thing is to look at potential clients, potential institutions that we can work with. And in Poland, we have a pretty good and long tradition of non-government organizations, different cooperatives. Also, ecclesiastic legal persons are a major player who can be involved both in charity activity, but also social economy enterprises. And we have growing number of limited liability and joint stock companies. And also we have various legal forms of creating an entity that will be focus on helping people with disabilities to be more integrated in the work market. And on the next slide, we present how this ecosystem in Poland looks like. And as you can see, we have centralized part and also regional system. And what I would like to stress is that there is a bit more points and a bit more forms in a regional system, and that is a very good thing. I think maybe we should present it in different order, because the whole activity, we believe, depends on how many active and mature organizations we have that are able to start a business venture and enter the dialogue with that central system, which is run by government, obviously. And the whole I believe the whole history started with the fact that in Poland we have very obvious conclusion that we have very low employment of people with disabilities, very economic and social development on various regions were unequal, and the conclusion was that we have to use social economy tools to breach all these disparities. Unfortunately, when those conclusions that we have to invest in social economy, that conclusion made by the government, it was possible to start a dialogue with very many organizations who were interested to do various things regarding to this issue. And in Poland, we have NGOs, development centers, we have social economy coordination centers. Obviously, we have loan funds now, and also social economy support centers that deliver, they offer various advisory, etc. And a lot of different committees and working groups constantly in the dialogue with centralized level. And on the next slide, as a result, we have obviously grants, but not only for social project, but also to develop a business activity, which is very important. This is a basis on which we can cooperate with various organizations. So they first have a grant that enabling them to start a business, and then we assess if they are investment ready and continue work with them. And of course, technical assistance with different advisories is essential. We have loans from lenders' own funds, but also we use easy guarantee as well. As it was mentioned, it makes loans a bit more accessible and lower cost as it would be without that instrument. And we have various financing or co-financing solutions with the use of European Union money. And loan system started with expert teamwork in 2008, when Poland was analyzed regarding to number of existing NGOs, social cooperatives, development, etc. The decision was that in the first project, pilot project, the risk will be covered by the state. Then the agreement between the Ministry of Labor and Social Policy was signed between Ministry and public bank, the State Development Bank, who was to choose financial intermediaries responsible for providing services. And in that 2013, TISE won a bit in all macro regions, and we started that pilot project. We can move to the next slide. Here we present some information about how the whole thing was organized. Loans were not too high. I would say that the conservative approach is a right description of what was during that pilot phase. But we managed to achieve what was aimed, also exceed those goals. And also that project enabled to assess the financial situation of social enterprises, to have a better knowledge what they need, how we can work with them. Let's move on. Here we have a slide presenting some information about legal form and business type, but I will suggest those who are interested to maybe later on it will be possible to analyze this data. Let's move on to the next slide. And the final conclusion about that pilot project was that the loans were too low, and what was important, loans were dedicated only for investment and job creation purposes. So there was no offer for working capital. And some entities who employ more than 50 employees were excluded from the system, and also startups were excluded. So as a result, let's move on. As a result, since 2016, we have a next phase of that loan project, which is maximum financing is much higher, 10 times higher, 5 times higher in terms of a single loan. And it is possible to grant multiple loans, so divide the development project into phases and just adjust what we do with the client as we go. In a working capital is possible to be financed. Loans can be for longer periods, and also those those loans are available for more, I think currently various, all types of organization. There is an offer for actually all types of organization, including medium and also various forms of legal forms of organization. And also the important difference now is that we as a TISE, we are involved in risk taking. So we participate in a risk of that project, which is a major difference from the pilot project. And also we utilize that easy guarantee, as I mentioned. We work in Poland, but also outside Poland, which is very valuable experience. And we can move on. And having that experience with loans, we are exploring new avenues. And one of most important avenue we are now exploring and going is social venture capital fund. And about details, Mr. Radziwiłł will tell us.
Yeah, so this is the project that I am running now. It has been established by TISE with the support of the Ministry of Development in 2018. It's a small pilot project meant to assess whether the social economy sector needs this type of equity or quasi-equity investment. And so in the project, our investees must meet double objectives, financial and social. Next slide, please. So there can be all types of actors of the sector can be supported by this instrument. And the interesting thing here is that the instrument. We have equity investments, which is the typical typical venture capital instrument. So for non-profit companies and some cooperatives, but we also can invest in quasi-equity instruments in NGOs or in associations, which are actually loans, but loans taking the risk of the project and also taking potentially getting the remuneration on the success based on the success of the project. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we have already we started. We have an investment period of 4 years, and then there is a 5 years period of monitoring. It has to be ended in 2028, and there is an agreement between the investors, meaning the ministry and TISE, and they are pari passu, so they will be repaid equally at the end of the project. And TISE gets a carried interest. It's an interesting feature. We get so the carried interest will be paid if there is obviously a financial success, but the base of the payment is the social impact generated by the project. Next slide, please. I think that this is it. Yeah, so now we have a few examples of the projects. I don't think we have time really to go through them. What maybe I will just two sentences to wrap up. So I just to say that we have the feeling that in Poland, this social economy system, which is quite obviously compared to the national economy, it's not big, but it comprises you can count easily. It is 15 or 20,000 entities. TISE has granted something like more than 1,000 loans to these entities. So this is an important sector already. And we must stress that the instruments set up by the government, it's quite a broad set, as you can see, and there is a strong support to the system. And TISE is proud to be probably the leader on this interesting, I mean, maybe small but very interesting market. So I encourage you to go through the presentation, and we, both Magda and myself, and we are ready to answer your questions. I'm not sure you have time now, but please get in touch with us whenever you feel to do it. And just to stress that many people from TISE are involved in these initiatives, national initiatives, governmental and non-governmental, supposed to somehow set up this whole ecosystem in Poland. So we have quite a lot of knowledge in TISA, and we are really happy to be able to share it with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Magda and Michał. It was indeed a very comprehensive presentation, but I would say that we can all digest all this information and we will follow up with all of you. Just as a concluding remark, after sharing all this material with you, we also encourage you to check the EVPA website, because you'll find there a lot of useful information and material that we produced on EU funding and also the entire EVPA work on conducting access to finance. So please find some relevant links in the chat. So now we'll quickly share with you. And also, if you would like to find more about the social economy within EU, we are also organizing on the 24th of June a webinar on the EU Social Economy Action Plan and the role for social investors for impact, with speakers, very valuable speakers for the European Commission, but also with practitioners from different EU countries. The webinar is free and we highly encourage you to participate. Again, Sona will send the link in the chat. And concluding on a positive note, we would like to thank you to all the panelists, but also to the attendees for the patience and the curiosity to find more about this topic. Thank you very much. And Deva, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It was really interesting. Even though I know the examples, really great to hear it again. I think what is really interesting in both the Portugal experience and the Polish experience, I think also relevant for the markets of this project, right, Eastern Partnership, the size of the financial instruments, right, that you offer. I mean, we were presenting needs assessment survey on the first day of the conference, and basically, like in Portugal, Vera, you were talking about, you know, below 50K, for example, right, like early stage, also grant type of funding. With Poland, the amounts of funding are a little bit bigger, but those are exactly the amounts of money that majority of social enterprises in Eastern Partnership countries are looking for. And I think in both of those examples, right, this catalytic role of the public funding has been seen, right, that the government is really participating heavily. Of course, we have the EU support there, but we also know that in those countries that are not the EU members, there is on one hand EU also working with the state authorities and offering some funding for social entrepreneurship programs, but there are also there is local money as well, right, in the government, that the government can put into play and really take this risk at the, you know, supporting the social enterprises at the very early stage where nobody else can do this, because also there is not enough understanding of the concept, right? So thank you very much for that. I also really like that, Michał, you brought the case of Dalba, because the brewery, which might be controversial, right? Some people were thinking sometimes, how can you have a social enterprise producing a beer? But I know a social enterprise is producing really good wine in Georgia. So no problem, right, with that. But it's interesting because you presented Dalba. Yesterday we had actually Nest presenting the program that they do with IKEA. And Nest has been an investor, right, in Dalba Brewery. So it actually shows that you came as a follow-up investor, right? So Nest provided seed money, grant money, and then you came as a follow-up investor in building this ecosystem, what we really want, so that the social enterprises can get access to the money as they grow as well, right? So that it really fits their needs. So really nice example. I think we should probably keep an eye on Dalba and see how they develop further and who will be the next investor. Maybe a bigger one, helping them to also go to other markets. Let's see.